Hello, and today we're going to be talking about digital transformation and innovation, which are two of my favorite topics. And hello, how are you?
Hello, Rebecca. How are you doing? I'm
I'm
fine.
really good.
Yeah.
I'm really good. So tell me all about the sunshine and the warmth in South Africa.
Well, there's no better place on earth than South Africa. We've had lots of people saying, no, the grass is green on the other side, especially going to the UK and then saying, I haven't seen the sun for like months. So they end up coming back here. It's all about sun and the fun people.
Yeah, I know, I know. I love it over there. And I'm sitting here and it's dark. I mean, I've been up for 2 hours and it's still dark. It gets really, really depressing at this time of year. Anyway, moving on, moving on. So tell me, digital transformations are quite a difficult thing to define. And lots of people have lots of different ideas. So how would you sort of describe it for business people in practical terms?
So to describe it is actually quite simple. It's basically you're rewiring the organization and in the manner of how it actually operates, okay, with the goal of at the end of the day creating some kind of value by deploying technology into the organization. That's how I would describe it in a nutshell.
That was really great and really succinct. I think most people would find that really useful. I've not heard it described so well before. So, digital transformation is really important today, and everybody's talking about it, and you described it beautifully. But why is it more critical now than it's been before? Because I was there at the start of the internet. I know I look much younger than that, but I remember it.
We're the
But
same boat.
and we've been doing this for a long time, but why do you think it's more important today?
I think it's important today because your customer expectations are actually changing quite rapidly. So they want more digital in their space, they want it more personalized, and they want it smarter, and I think that's what they're really after at the end of the day. Secondly, you look at things like, the operational cost pressures. People want to bring costs down eventually. So the only way to actually get that going is to bring in digital transformation. So, and lastly, I think, it's all about having the competitive edge. So if you take company A out there versus company B, if company A has advanced in terms of technology where B hasn't, people tend to sort of lean towards company A and start talking to them more. I mean, I can give you a few examples. If you take, let's say, if you take the banking sector as an example. Now, traditionally you have the bank branch where people would have gone in. These days, it's all about technology. You can do everything on your phone, tablet, desktop, laptop, etc. I think that's where you want to be. Okay. Even your retail stores. I mean, people used to go into stores. These days, it's all about online shopping. So, that's my thoughts on that. I think, it's all about it's all about they don't want to take the risk anymore of falling behind. So it's all about adopting digital transformation and innovation within their space.
So a lot of people have funny ideas about it, really. I mean, I've come across them in Manchester actually recently. I was talking to somebody, I was a bit surprised at what they thought about it. So what do you think are the sort of biggest misconceptions about digital transformation at the moment?
The biggest misconceptions are basically is that people think it's all about, just being operational. I think it's more strategic, as a fundamental pillar. And it's also not just technical, it's also cultural. If you have those two pillars in place, I think, it starts to make more sense. So where the perception currently is, it's just basically, it's based on technology and that's it. That's wrong. Those are the pillars which I think where there's quite a big misconception at the moment.
Do you think that's where people fail by not getting those points right when they're introducing it and just focusing on operations?
Yeah, they definitely fail, when it comes to that. I mean, if you look at statistics that are out there, I think, 70% to 75% of digital transformation projects actually fail because it's not about the technology, but it's more about the culture and the leadership misalignment in terms of, if you don't get the buy-in from the top and the message goes down, that's where it normally fails. So, the question should rather be, should we transform or how fast can we transform? I think those are the questions that should be asked within any organization.
So how do you suggest that organizations begin that journey to get it right?
So the idea is to basically put a roadmap in place. It's not about waking up one morning and saying, okay, this is the project we're going to do. You need to have a proper roadmap in place. There's a lot of elements that are contained in a roadmap, but it's about getting that roadmap in place. I mean, we as consultants at the end of the day, we can guide a lot of clients of, putting a roadmap in place in their specific sector or organization. So getting the roadmap in place, paramount.
So with these roadmaps, the only way you're going to get there is if the people head that way. At the end of the day.
Correct.
So you can have all the I know this from doing strategies. You can have all the strategies in the world and they sit on a shelf because everyone else is like, I can't be bothered. I'm not going to do that. So how do you do that? How important is it to really manage that change process with the people and take them with you?
It's extremely important in my view. Again, it comes back to, the buy-in. All right. So if you don't have, first of all, buy-in from top management or your general workforce, nothing's going to change. So it comes back to the cultural change. And this is why a lot of transformation projects fail at the end of the day. You may look at change management as, the fluffy stuff at the end of the day, but it actually isn't. It's the most important thing in any transformation project. So, it comes back to your approach in terms of how you approach it, whether you do, an iterative approach or an agile approach at the end of the day. But again, comes back to buy-in, buy-in, buy-in. I think that's the most important.
But how do you keep it going? Because over the years, I've seen in all sorts of different environments, I've seen these projects start and everybody's terribly excited. And then everybody gets a little bit bored and they all go back to their job the way they've been doing it for years. And how do you keep that momentum going? How do you keep everybody on board?
My view is that, you need to put basically governance in place to track progress, manage the risk, and then adjust as required. And that comes to the agility at the end of the day. So defining KPIs with the business, basically showing the value that's going to be achieved out of it. And then also at the same time, encourage what we call continuous improvement. You can't come up with something and it remains static. The idea is to keep changing, transforming it, making it better. That's what that's what I think should be in place. You also got to think about, what's the pitfalls that are in place as well. So let's say, for example, if you keep the legacy systems in place, that's going to slow you down. That's for sure. If you basically, you get this siloed thinking where nobody's really thinking bigger picture, integration, etc. Again, you're going to fall into a trap where everything starts failing again. And again, I'm going to come back to the lack of, alignment with leadership. If we don't have that in place, again, you're heading into trouble. At the end of the day, you can't just focus on technology without, the other pillars or elements, because alone, the technology is not going to deliver any value. I think it's an end-to-end, process that needs to be put in place.
So you've emphasised how important it is to keep that momentum going. And that is because everything seems to be going very, very fast at the moment. And even in the last couple of years since the pandemic, things seem to have got faster and faster. So what do you feel is actually driving that rapid acceleration in both technology and innovation? Why is everyone so hungry for it? What's pushing that forward?
I think again, it comes back to my initial points around cost pressures. A lot of time people are trying to save as much cost as possible, with the end goal as making as much profit as possible. Um, the idea of, um, putting a project like this in place would be around reskilling current staff they have, where if you introduce things like automation or AI, you tend to sort of, the staff that is currently doing that, you end up losing them, which means you need to get rid of people. And the idea is not to get rid of people, but rather skill them, put them into positions where they actually apply their mind, take them away from the monotonous work they would do. So, for example, let's say you've got a data capture clerk. Okay. Now, all the person does day in, day out is take some kind of a document and capture it on the system. And that's all they do for 8 hours a day. You'd rather bring in something like, AI or automation rather to do that task, which gives the person more time to focus on more strategic tasks at the end of the day. um, that's what I think should be in place, because again, whatever you introduce, the idea is not to get rid of people. Okay,
Yeah.
because you can't do any kind of transformation project bringing in technology and think you can get rid of people. You still need the humans involved in the process at the end of the day.
Would you say that that's very much the innovation part? So, as part of their transformation journey, you've still kind of got to have innovation sitting over the top of it, and that's what the human aspect is. Would you agree with that? And do you think
Yes,
that's
definitely agree with that. The innovation part is where they play a big role. But we must also remember the risk of using, whether it's automation or AI as an example, it might, the results might not be 100% correct. So at some point, you would need a human intervention to review some of the work that's been done. If we take something highly technical, let's say we're talking tax in a specific country as an example. So if we created, let's say, a kind of a GPT where you can ask specific text questions. Now, it all comes down to what reference material is available for the GPT to give you some kind of a solution. But sometimes it does not interpret it 100% correct. And that's where you would need a tax expert, for example, to look at the results before saying, we're comfortable, this is fine, and it works. It's all about the training that gets, that forms part of the process, because nothing works right the first time around. So it's all about the learnings and how we improve from where we are right now.
so? One of the things I come across a lot is the difference in culture between different firms, and where one firm will do something quite exciting with me and try something, and we go, oh, that didn't quite work, but maybe if we did it this time, this way, next time, and you learn. And
Yeah.
there's a bit more fluid, more of a fluid attitude to it. And then there's other places where they want a result immediately. And if it isn't there, then it's probably not worth doing. And so they reject it. And obviously the developing it and improving it in some areas is very much the right way to go. And this is very, and I think transformation is also very like that. So how do you change that culture? Because it really is a cultural thing to have an attitude of innovation, of trying things, trying again, and just keep improving things. How do you develop that in people?
So, at the end of the day, if you take any organization, normally the transformation projects would start internally as an internal project. I would rather play the role of an advisor, go into a certain company or firm and try to get the message across that, innovation doesn't only come from within. You need external companies to actually assist you in developing the roadmap, to give you advice, show you what's been done outside, show you how different thinking, would be included in what you're trying to create at the end of the day. So it's more about the advice you give them and the role you can play in helping them actually get to the, where they want to be. But it's all, the message should be, you cannot do this alone. You do need other role players. You need people to assist you. And you may not know all the technologies, as an example, that are out there. So get a third party in, let them assist you. Once you're comfortable, you can start running with that going forward.
So where do people start then? If you're going to start planning ahead and thinking where you next go, which is with your technology and your digital transformation, where
Yeah.
do you actually start? How do you best achieve it?
So again, best achieving it is to put some kind of a roadmap in place. Now, this roadmap can consist of, you know, few elements. So, for example, you know, there should be a clear strategy around where do we want to go as an organization with our digital transformation projects. Second thing to look at would be things like data readiness. You know, you have different legacy, disparate systems or standalone systems. You need to start standardizing on information, you know, to actually get it ready so that your transformation project can start taking shape. You need to look at things like piloting projects. You know, you don't want to go with this big bang approach. You need to do it in phases. You need to identify, you know, the processes which you want to automate, as an example. Um, and then you need to start embedding those processes into your organization as well. Because a simple thing like, you know, your policies that you have in place in firms, those need to be updated as well, so that people within those organizations understand, you know, what needs to be done, where we're going, what the vision is. And then, like I said previously, you need to have some kind of a governance place in place, so that you can measure, you know, the progress, have KPIs in place. And then once your pilots are basically done, that's when you start scaling and building up further on what you have built. You know, I mean, there's a lot of examples we can talk about. You know, it's for example, let's say you take something like a chatbot. Okay, personalize it for your own organization. You get a lot of chatbots out there that are generic and vanilla, you know, but they don't work in your organization. So things like that, you need to start changing that. I mean, if you take something like robotic process automation, you know, normally you would use things like, you know, in finance or in HR. I'm going to give you one example of a project I did recently for an FMCG company that they manufacture cosmetics, and their biggest top two clients are two massive retail supermarkets. And what happens is they tend to deliver products to these clients. Sometimes there's a whole lot of returns. Sometimes there's changes in pricing because of the new contracts that were signed. Now, the old process was they would go into the client's portal, download the documents, come onto their SAP system as an example, then look at the product code, find out what is the related product in their own system, and then start updating it manually. Now, one batch of documents were taking them around 3 weeks. Okay.
Mm.
The RPA process we put in place made them do those documents within 7.5 minutes.
Oh my
So
goodness.
it basically logged into the supplier portal,
And they went
pulled the
on holiday
documents
for the
down.
rest of the time. Yeah.
That's exactly. I mean, they are extremely happy with what we've done
Yeah,
for
I
them.
can
So
imagine.
that was the first process. The next process is now they want to start doing the reconciliations, which we're busy automating for them at the moment. But it's all about, you know, it's the value that you add to the client. You know, at least what was being done in 3 weeks is now being done in 7.5 minutes. So those are the kind of things, you know, you need to start thinking about.
Mm.
How do you automate things? How do you save time? How do you do things quicker, faster, more accurately?
Yeah, no, that's really impressive. So, I mean, if you were a leader, what would you say is the one thing that they need to take from this discussion today?
So, what I think they need to take from this discussion today is basically, you know, that anything to do with innovation, technology, whether it's AI or RPA, they are definitely game changers. Okay. So we need to start thinking about how do we plan this? How do we bring the changes in? And, we need to start asking a lot of questions. So we could be asking things like, are we clear on our business value? Do we understand what is the current state and what the future state's going to be? And in respect of AI or automation, do we have the data that's ready, the governance and the right use cases? Because the right use cases are going to be the most important thing. I mean, you could go and start a project and it might not be the right use case, and you spend a lot of time and money and it fails miserably. So it's all about identifying the correct use cases. So, with those fundamentals in place, I think, it's you basically have a strategic enabler that it enables you to be competitive, you can grow, and you can innovate. Those are things that I
Yeah,
think.
really helpful. So
Yeah.
so tomorrow morning I get up and I think, right, I'm going to get going at this. What is the one practical thing that I should do to get going?
Practical thing, I think there's 2 points I'd like to make on that. The first one is start small, think big, but scale fast. I think that's what I would think. And then secondly, you need to invest in your people more than what you invest in your platforms. And I think that's the most important.
That's good.
That's my reflection on that. Yeah.
Honestly, this has been so interesting and incredibly practical. I think anybody listening to this has written it all down and has got a
I hope
real
so.
way forward. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. It's been so nice to see you today, and really appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Rebecca. It was nice meeting you as well.